Brewing Conversation, live from Nicaragua. Dive deep into the world of coffee with co-founders of Twin Engine Coffee, Andrea Woolverton and Colin Ganley.
Welcome to Brewing Conversation, Season 0, Episode 2. We are still in the womb. My name is Andrea Woolverton.
And my name is Colin Ganley, and today's subject is actually that. We recorded our first episode, The Spark of the Idea, talking about how we decided to start a coffee company, why, where, when, how, etc. But what we didn't do is really introduce ourselves. And so this is an extremely uncomfortable episode because we have to talk about ourselves, each other, etc. And nobody really likes to.
And one of us is from Minnesota. Irish German Minnesota.
What does that mean to you?
Well, I think it means that you really don't want to talk about yourself.
Yes,
right?
There are many subjects that we in Minnesota do not discuss. Ourselves being one of them sometimes.
And how much the house cost, right?
Yeah, you never talk about how much something costs in Minnesota. It's very rude.
Okay, I could go all day long about the Minnesota jokes, but we'll move on.
So apparently, I'm from Minnesota. That is a part of my background that I often forget because it's not the most transformative or formative, I guess, part of my background as I think about it.
You say.
Andrea, a staunch Freudian, believes that it is. So I've heard many theories about how Minnesota has shaped my behavior, typically when I'm doing something strange. But Andrea is from Missouri, where she grew up in a small town.
In the boot hill of Missouri.
Yes. It's not entirely Missouri. She's only tangentially Missourian because she likes to talk about how it's part of the Mid-South and how her dad had a cotton farm and how it's more about fried chicken and grits than it is about, what do they have in northern Missouri? The Arch?
Well, that's in St. Louis. So northern Missouri is more country, animals, rolling hills, where we are south of the ridge, geographical difference. And so from there on, it's flat all the way down to the bayou, basically in Louisiana. So Minneapolis, when you're in Minneapolis, and then you get on I-55, and you can just go straight down almost to Memphis.
35, I think.
No, 55.
Yeah?
55 goes all the way from Minneapolis to New Orleans, for sure.
35 goes from Minneapolis to Houston.
Yeah, it cuts through more of the middle. This just follows the river the whole way.
For the people who are listening to this who are not from the United States, this is probably really inane, but people, for some reason, in the Midwest like to talk about highways. It's I've never understood that.
No.
But anyway, we are both Midwesterners in some sense. I guess, can you say you're Midwesterner, or do you have to say you're Mid-South?
Well, I went to the University of Missouri, which brought up my Midwestern qualifications. I got a nice, in Columbia, Missouri. So that was a nice dip into the Midwestern side of my Missouri raising.
Yeah. That was when you went to the victorious side of the Civil War.
That's funny.
Yeah.
That's funny.
It is. It's north of the Mason-Dixon line, isn't it?
Well, the Mason-Dixon line is in Maryland. Is that correct?
Yeah, but it goes to the west.
Well, yeah. If you drew it out and just kept drawing, you would eventually get to Missouri. But it actually has nothing to do with Missouri. It predates Missouri.
Oh, really?
The whole concept predates the idea of the Midwest.
Oh. I didn't know that Missouri was so young.
Yeah, it is young.
All right. So, that's enough of that. What we really want to talk about in this is we want to introduce ourselves because we're going to be talking in this series about all these different issues related to coffee. We're living in Nicaragua. We're in the coffee in every part of it. So from the cultivation to the brokers to everybody, we have sort of a view of these things that most people don't have. A lot of times coffee companies will send somebody to a country like this to go buy coffee, and it's kind of like tourism. It seems from the outside. They come down, have a few sips of coffee, smile, shake hands, and then they go back home to their comfortable place. But we live here, and we know the growers and the brokers and all the people involved in the whole supply chain, and we want to share the stories about what's really going on here and what the dynamics are like. And so before we start opening that door, we thought it would be useful perhaps to just sort of say a little bit about ourselves. So maybe the easiest way to do this is we can each introduce each other and then correct, and then the person it's about can correct it a little bit. So,
I don't know if I like that.
So Andrea went to University of Missouri, where she ultimately received her PhD in agricultural economics. And along with her early career, actually informs a lot of her approach to the coffee company, the looking at it from a relationships perspective. Economics is all about relationships and transactions. And so seeing a food product like this as a bunch of meaningful transactions between people, whether it's the person who buys the final cup of coffee and what their relationship is with the people down the chain, or whether it's the relationship between farmers and their employees, or farmers and brokers, etc. I think it's a really useful lens, especially understanding economics in a global sense, which she does because her work was, after college, was with the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, and then the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, which kind of by definition sinks you into the global food world. And I think that a lot of that background is kind of informs her approach to some of the issues that we're talking about here. She has a really strong interest in the community aspects, the social aspects, and the cultural aspects of what we're doing here. And I think that her background a little bit explains why that is. So
you're doing a nice job. Thank you.
Did I do a good job?
Never realized you paid as much attention to
Yeah, I even know what the acronyms mean.
To what I was doing. I mean, it's also, I have a hard time introducing myself. I would be terrible at the elevator pitch without talking just a little bit about growing up in a relatively poor small town with a community raising grandmas, neighbors, godmothers, because what I find, funnily enough, when I was doing all the work in undeveloped, developing, poor countries, is that my home was much more similar to those places than it was, say, parts of urban centers in the U.S. And so, funnily enough, my mother's quite comfortable in León, Nicaragua. So yeah, thank you for giving me such a nice introduction. It's been rather interesting, especially into coffee. I didn't realize the strong aspects of coffee, like parts of my background, like working in cooperatives and international rural comparison and markets. I had no idea how those things would come to really inform long-term development. So enough about me. Colin Ganley, as he said, he's from Minneapolis, Minnesota, grew up there. And the fun stories I like to think about are him earning some extra cash by trying to get his pilot's license in high school.
Yeah.
Is that right? Washing planes, which I hear is a pretty mucky job.
It's very dirty. Cleaning dried exhaust residue off the side of a fiberglass airplane is really hard.
Yeah. Plus, I assume it's pretty cold sometimes,
yes.
Right? Yeah. So pretty cold. I think he's the oldest of four. And so there was a lot of babysitting, a lot of, I think I could see calmness. So Colin went to Montana, right? Went to Montana first on a semi-pro ski scholarship, made his way back to Minneapolis, and then ultimately decided to go to business school on the East Coast. So actually, after having some pretty challenging years in his first couple of years of college, really made up for it and said, hey, I'm going to try to go to one of the best business schools in the United States. And so he got in to Bentley College, Bentley University.
At that time, it was called Bentley College. It's now Bentley University.
Yeah, so now Bentley University. And from there, moved to England, into the London School of Economics, and then working on his PhD at Oxford. And while he was there, as some of you may know, the premium cigar culture has a long history in Europe and also, and particularly in England, with a relationship with Cuban cigars. And so Colin, during his studies, started investigating in a rather academic way. What is this culture, the differences between cigars, and working to think about them and write about them, and started freelance writing. And that parlayed into effectively becoming a journalist in the premium cigar world and a taster, and an entrepreneur by purchasing half of a cigar magazine, what is now Cigar Journal, and he taught over the years through Oxford, quite a diverse background in terms of educating other people. And what I see now is he developed a very objective approach, which has served us. So both his tasting ability that he developed through being in Spanish, it's a catador, a taster of premium cigars, has parlayed into coffee, and as well as the objectivity. So becoming a great educator and taster within our coffee company together.
Oh, aren't you sweet?
You're welcome.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that there's really nothing to sort of change there. I think you're right. There was this weird thing that I never anticipated and didn't plan either, which is the tasting aspect of it. So those years of reviewing cigars, which ultimately then turned into reviewing and working with cognac producers. We had that project with Remy Martin.
Oh, yeah, that was fun.
Where they wanted... I had a kind of a high profile in cigars. I guess maybe I still do to some degree, but at the time it was a pretty high profile as the chief editor of this magazine and co-owner, etc. And so Remy Martin has this product, Louis XIII, which is a very expensive cognac, which includes some cognacs that have been aging in the barrel for over 100 years. And it's really their premier product. And they wanted to find the ultimate cigar pairing for that spirit. And so they asked me if I would help them to do it. And it was great. And, those kinds of things sort of moved the critical tasting from just cigars into spirits and wine in particular. And then you just can't help but sort of letting it tumble and expand with food. And we became very critical about food. You sort of had a base in home cooking, which has a lot to do with ingredients, ripeness, freshness. And our time in Italy really...
Yeah, it was like an awakening.
Accelerated
of those, not because the food is complicated at all, but because
it's all about the core quality of the ingredients.
Right. So, and it's not... I hate this food snob. If I could eliminate any word from the new U.S. vocabulary, it's this idea of coffee snob or food snob or cigar snob. It's that currently there are a lot of different qualities of ingredients out there. And why is it not this idea that it's not okay to choose high quality ingredients for your body? So these things happen, and it's nothing about money. It has nothing to do about wanting to spend more. It's just wanting to consume something that tastes like it should and be able to tell the difference.
Yeah, I mean, because there are some products that are extraordinary and world-class, and you have to pay a lot of money to get them. But there are also very affordable luxuries out there, and all it takes is a little bit of, I guess, reading or understanding or talking to people to understand
trying
where those values are. Because, whether it's in Scotch whiskey or coffee or fresh produce or whatever it happens to be, you can eat or drink as well as the wealthiest person in the world with a little bit of knowledge and sourcing, I guess.
So we both now, for me, the food culture is really near and dear with my work in agricultural economics because it's still kind of the pathway to the soul, to the families. But we both enjoyed tasting always, comparing. I'm thinking about our amazing Prosecco tasting when we were living in Italy of 50 some odd bottles.
That was like 90.
No, ranging from €2 to 20. Prosecco in Italy doesn't get too expensive. Just some different styles and to really try to understand differences.
Yeah. So I think the thing that we haven't discussed about us is us as human beings. Something that we haven't said explicitly is that we are married. We've been married for 25 years?
Oh, good Lord. So we have been married since 2010. Okay. So we will celebrate 9 years next year. We have a little girl named Lucille, who is going to be 4 here in December. She was born here in Leon, Nicaragua. She's bilingual, probably speaks better Spanish than we do. Definitely sounds like a local, that's for sure, when she does speak Spanish. And we have similar and also quite different personalities at the same time. I'd say I am more of a born extrovert, and
I'm absolutely an introvert, but it doesn't mean I don't like people. I just need time by myself.
Well, I mean, in my work in one of the trainings in the Economic Research Service when I was in the USDA, and one of the areas of USDA, economists tend to be introverts by birth, and I'm not. So I'm a bit of an outlier in that regard, but understanding these things, and it's really about where you get your energy from. So Colin has a great time with people. He just needs to recharge afterwards. Whereas if I'm not around people enough and sharing ideas, I feel like I need to go find them to recharge, which is a pretty different response.
Speaking of economists, I don't know if you mentioned it. So what I studied for my master's degree was economic history, and also for my doctorate. So I don't know if you said that I was an economist.
No, I did not. I know both economists. Yes, yes.
So that's a little bit about our backgrounds, who we are as humans, what our backgrounds are professionally and developmentally as we came to start this coffee company. And we just thought we would share this little view into who we are before we launch into these deep subjects about coffee and what's happening in the world of coffee. So thanks for joining us, and we will see you on the next episode.
This has been Brewing Conversation with Andrea Woolverton and Colin Ganley. Thank you for listening. For more connection to coffee and Twin Engine Coffee, go to twinenginecoffee.com or email us. We'd love to hear from you.